All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Dan's Astrology. Today it's the 7th of December. The planet Venus is perfectly conjunct Pluto right now and has just ingressed into the 00 degree of Aquarius. It's also come to my attention that the asteroid Ceres is also in a triple conjunction with these planets. Although my style, I tend not to focus on the dwarf planets or the asteroid goddesses as much, but it is worth considering. It is kind of on my mind, that factor. I was thinking about how to approach a transit like this, and to me, going into it, it feels like a particularly gnarly one, given that Mars has just recently stationed retrograde in Leo, and Mars is in a opposition right now by, I think, 5 or 6 degrees orb to this Venus Pluto conjunction. And so that's not just Venus Pluto, but it's Venus Pluto opposite a retrograde Mars in Leo. And one of the things that I've seen in the news, like, there's a lot of things going on in the world today, right? One of the things that's obviously just in the top of the news right now is that there was a recent assassination of a CEO of a healthcare insurance company in America. And I'm, of course, just pointing this out because Pluto has a lot of association with destruction or with power or with power imbalances and stuff like that. And I'll just say it very bluntly that, I am a Canadian, I'm not an American, and I've had the privilege of being able to enjoy public health care my whole life. And it's just one of these things where it's like, some people, there's some Canadians who are not educated about this, who they just kind of assume that, I was in the hospital and there was a guy who was talking about how he was dealing with this really terrible health condition, but he really just wished he lived in America because it would be like sunnier there, or that, like, you get so much American media, America's cool, and you're just, Canada. But there's something about, we take it for granted that everything's cheap in America and everything's expensive in Canada, right? If you want to buy cigarettes or whatever, you want to get cigarettes and alcohol in America, it's really cheap. But then if you get sick, you got to pay for it, right? In Canada, they put heavy tax on stuff like cigarettes and alcohol because it causes so much illness or whatever, and we have public health care or whatever. I don't know. I'm not going to get on a political rant about public health care, but it's just something that I have had the privilege to enjoy my whole life. And I can understand how, like, this is the whole premise of Breaking Bad, right? Like, how many people are under pressure, all this pressure to, like, support themselves. They're like, people are, there's so much rage and anger around the fact that you've got these business people who are basically making money off holding people hostage, basically. Your money or your life. It's like highway robbery. So what you're seeing in the news anyways is it's kind of a lot of people giving some kind of positive support to the assassin, right? And I think that could be indicative of the Venus-Mars opposition, because there's this kind of like Venus has the effect of like making something more agreeable, right? So there's Mars Pluto could be really like, I don't know. There's disturbing stuff in the news all the time. I don't need to focus. I mean, I feel like it's maybe getting off the wrong track to focus on these negative things happening. But with Venus there's certain things where it's like that kind of destructive force, or that there's some kind of like the people are in agreement with it, and there's a different kind of response with Venus joining in the Venus-Mars opposition, right? Now the thing is, there's other things going on too, which are kind of questionable. They're like, for instance, there was another wave of UFO hearings recently, and I'm not really sure what to make of all that myself. It's something I've always been kind of interested in to some extent. I had an experience once where I saw, it could have been perhaps maybe just an interesting meteorite, but there's something about, I saw something which I think could be considered a UFO, because it was just so unusual from what you normally see in the sky. I won't get into that now, but I still have that experience. I still remember seeing this funny thing streaking across the sky that just did not look like anything I've ever seen before. And I was noticing that a lot of people seem to associate Aquarius with UFOs, with aliens, with stuff like that. And I was kind of like, from the point of view of astrology, we're talking about constellations in the sky. And if we're actually talking, to some extent, everything about astrology has to do with outer space in the first place. So what makes Aquarius specifically more resonant with aliens and UFOs? It's the myth of Ganymede. And it has to do with Ganymede as a cupbearer for Zeus, right? And the idea that there's this myth about Zeus being attracted to this young man Ganymede and whisking him up into to be his cupbearer, right? And there's this kind of archetype about like some being recognized by some power up on high, and it's almost, and the being, it's kind of like people are drawing that to being like an alien abduction or something like that, right? And so I was thinking about learning more about this. I have to admit too that when it comes to astrology, there's it's common for a lot of astrologers to do a lot of studying of mythology, and I have to say I just have a lot of different interests, and although I am interested in Greek mythology, I've been kind of just learning about it at my own pace, and I have to admit I only went to post-secondary school to take a graphic design course, and it's one of these things where I'm like considering, like, what inspires me, what motivates me in life right now is I am interested in the classical literature, in arts and philosophy, but there's just a lot of economic pressure right now, and I've always been given this message that, like, you're just going to go into debt and go broke and be like a starving artist, or like be a bitter, barista working at Starbucks who isn't able to do anything with your like classical arts degree or something like this, right? But I don't know. For that reason, anyways, I've been doing a lot of my own self-directed learning, and this has kind of led me to pick up a book by one of the ancient poets from ancient Greece named Ovid. And I think that, first of all, there's a certain, like, when we were talking about Pluto and Venus and Aquarius, one of the first cookbook descriptors usually applied to Pluto is transformation, obviously, right? And what's another word for transformation aside from the Metamorphoses, right? So what I've got is Ovid's Metamorphoses, and a kind of a transformation, of course. And I think there's something interesting about reading this stuff because, like, I don't know if it's just Ovid or if it's like the way these myths are presented, but it's interesting to go back to like some of the original poets and just get it straight from the source. But I think I thought this would go well with Venus conjunct Pluto in Aquarius, because there's something about it that is like it's sort of like you can see that the Greeks are sort of embracing a certain kind of like sexual dynamic in the mythology, right? And when you've got Venus opposite Mars, you've got Mars and Leo, Venus and Aquarius, and you got Pluto there. There's something interesting too about the chronology about where this myth. I haven't read the whole Ovid's Metamorphoses yet, right? I haven't, but I've just kind of read specific myths on their own. But in the chronology of where Ganymede shows up, he shows up in Book 10, and is the third myth preceded by the myth of Cyparissus and the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, right? And the myth of Orpheus obviously relates to the Orphic mysteries, right? And the journey to the underworld, right? So it's kind of, first of all, to me, this, like, this is obviously not following this sort of, like, resonance of synchronicity of, like, okay, we're talking about Venus in Aquarius, and we're talking about Pluto, the underworld, the journey to the underworld, the transformation, the metamorphosis, you know what I'm saying? Like, it hits all the notes. So this is why I'm just explaining my reasoning for getting into this, and not just doing the Ganymede myth, but reading these three myths in order. And the thing is, I have to admit, I'm not, as I said, I'm not an academic, I'm not a scholar, I'm just going on my own self-directed learning, and so bear with me, I'm still learning about this, right? I don't claim any expertise, but it'll be a learning experience for all of us. So I'm going to read from the book 10 of the Metamorphoses, the first three myths, starting with the myth of Orpheus. And, of course, this was about the guy who's tried to save his wife from the underworld. And it kind of gets into that whole thing about don't look back, right? And whatever. I will read these myths and then in this chronological order. Because I feel it goes with this Venus-Pluto-Mars opposition. Thence Hymen came, in saffron mantle clad, at Orpheus' summons through the boundless sky, to Thessaly, but vain the summons proved. True he was present, but no hallowed words he brought, nor happy smiles, nor lucky sign. Even the torch he held sputtered throughout, with smarting smoke, and caught no living flame for all his brandishing. The ill-starred rite led to a grimmer end. The new-wed bride, roaming with her gay naiads through the grass, fell dying when a serpent struck her heel. And when at last the bard of Rhodope had mourned his fill in the wide world above, he dared descend through Taenarus' dark gate to Hades to make trial of the shades. And though the thronging wraiths and grave-spent ghosts, and through the thronging wraiths and grave-spent ghosts, he came to pale Persephone and him, Lord of the Shades, who rules the unlovely realm. And as he struck his lyre's sad chords, he said, Ye deities who rule the world below, whither we mortal creatures all return, if simple truth, direct and genuine, may by your leave be told, I have come down, not with intent to see the glooms of hell, nor to enchain the triple snake-haired necks of Ceres, but for my dear wife's sake, in whom a trodden viper poured his venom, and stole her budding years. My heart has sought strength to endure, the attempt I'll not deny, but love has won, a god whose fame is fair, in the world above. But here I doubt, though here too I surmise, and if that ancient tale of ravishment is true, you too were joined in love. Now by these regions filled with fear, by this huge chaos, these silent realms, reweave, I implore, the fate unwound too fast of my Eurydice. To you are owed ourselves and all creation. A brief while we linger, and then we hasten, late or soon. To one abode here one road leads us all. Here in the end is home over humankind. Your kingdom keeps the longest sovereignty. She too, when ripening years reach their due term, shall own your rule. The favor that I ask is but to enjoy her love, and if the fates will not reprieve her, my resolve is clear. Not to return, may two deaths give you cheer. So to the music of his strings he sang, and all the bloodless spirits wept to hear. And Tantalus forgot the fleeing water. Ixion's wheel was tranced. The Daidads laid down their urns. The vultures left their feast. And Sisyphus sat wrapped upon his stone. Then first, by that sad singing overwhelmed, the Furies' cheeks, it said, were wet with tears. And Hades' queen, and he whose scepter rules the underworld, could not deny the prayer and called Eurydice. She was among the recent ghosts, and limping from her wound, came slowly forth, and Orpheus took his bride, and with her this compact, that, till he reach the world above, and leave Avernus' vale, he not look back, or else the gift would fail. The track climbed upward, steep and indistinct, through the hushed silence and the murky gloom. And now they neared the edge of the bright world, and, fearing lest she faint, longing to look, he turned his eyes, and straight she slipped away. He stretched his arms to hold her, and to be held, and clasped, poor soul, not but the yielding air. And she, dying again, made no complaint. For what complaint had she, save she was loved? And breathed a faint farewell, and turned again back to the land of spirits whence she came. The double death of his Eurydice stole Orpheus's wits away, like him who saw in dread the three-necked hound of hell with chains fast round his middle neck, and never lost his terror until he lost his nature too, and turned to stone, or Alenos, who took upon himself the charge and claimed the guilt when his ill-starred Lethia trusted to her beauty, hearts once linked so close, and now two rocks on runneled Ida's mountainside. He longed, he begged, in vain to be allowed to cross the stream of Styx a second time. The ferryman repulsed him. Even so, for 7 days he sat upon the bank, unkept and fasting, anguish, grief and tears, his nourishment, and cursed hell's cruelty. Then he withdrew to soaring Rhodope, and Haemus, battered by the northern gales. 3 times the sun had reached the watery fish. That closed the year. While Orpheus held himself aloof from love of women, hurt perhaps by ill success, or bound by plighted troth, yet many a woman burned with passion for the bard, and many grieved at their repulse. It was his lead that taught the folk of Thrace the love for tender boys, to pluck the buds, the brief springtime, with manhood still to come. Now, I'm just going to interrupt and point out that it does sound a little bit, I know the ancient Greeks maybe had different standards for this may not be, there's something about this that's not by our they may not include that. We may be more used to a sanitized, cleaned up version that doesn't have the somehow Orpheus comes out of this with an appreciation for young boys like that. Most people would want to not get into that part of it, right? There was a hill on the hill a wide level of open ground, all green with grass. The place lacked any shade, but when the heaven-born bard, sat there and touched his strings, shade came in plenty. Every tree was there. Dodona's holy durmast, poplars once the sun's sad daughters, oaks with lofty leaves, soft limes, the virgin laurel, and the beech, the ash, the choice wood for spear shafts, brittle hazels, the knotless fir, the ilex curving down with weight of acorns, many-colored maples, the social plane, the river-loving willow, the water lotus, box for evergreen, the thin tamarisks and myrtles double-hued, viburnums bearing berries of rich blue, twist-footed ivy came in tendrilled vines, and vine-clad elms, pitch pines, and mountain ash, arbutus laden with its blushing fruit, lithe, lofty palms, the prize of victory, and pines high-girdled in a leafy crest, the favorite of Cybele, the gods' great mother, since in this tree Attis doffed his human shape and stiffened in its trunk. And that is Ovid's take on Orpheus and Eurydice. The next poem I'm less familiar with, or the next myth, is Cyparissus. Amid the throng, the cone-shaped cypress stood, a tree now, but in days gone by, loved by that god who strings both lyre and bow. Once sacred to the nymphs who dwell among Carthia's fields, there was a giant stag, whose spreading antlers shed a screen of shade upon his head, whose antlers gleamed with gold, and from his silky neck a collar hung over his shoulders, set with precious stones. Upon his brow, secured by slender strings, a silver medal swayed, given at his birth, and round his hollow temples, gleaming bright from either ear, a pearly pendant hung. Quite fearless, all his natural shyness lost, he often visited the homes of men, and he let even strangers stroke his neck. But of them all he was the favorite of Cyparissus, Ceres' fairest lad, and he it was who used to lead the stag to pasture and the waters of the spring. Flowers of many colors he would weave around his horns, mounted on his back, a happy cavalier ride up and down, gilding his tender mouth with crimson reins. It was high noon upon a summer's day, the sun's bright beams were burning as the crab that loves the shoreline spread its curving claws, the stag laid down upon the grass to rest. Now, it's interesting, that's obviously a reference to Cancer, and in the previous poem there was a reference to Pisces. Maybe, I'm just new at this. I'm not a scholar, I'm not an academic, but it's interesting to note that in each of these so far there's been a zodiacal association. And breathe the coolness of the spinny's shade. There, unaware, with his sharp javelin, young Cyparissus pierced him to the heart. And as he saw him dying of the wound, so cruel he resolved to die himself. For words of comfort did not Phoebus give. What warnings not to yield to grief so sore, so ill-proportioned? Still he groaned and begged at last boon from the gods, that he might mourn forevermore. And now, with endless sobs, with lifeblood drained away, his limbs began to take a greenish hue. His hair that curled down from his snowy brow rose in a crest of bristles, and as stiffness spread, a graceful spire grazed at the starry sky. Apollo groaned and said in sorrow, I shall mourn for you, for others you shall mourn, you shall attend when men with grief are torn. And now we come to Ganymede. This is where Ganymede shows up. The myth of Ganymede as told by Ovid. Here we go. Such was the grove the bard assembled. There he sat amid a company of beasts, a flock of birds, and when he tried his strings, and as he tuned, was satisfied the notes, though different, agreed in harmony, he sang this song from Jove, great mother muse, inspire my song to Jove all creatures bow. Jove's might I've often hymned in days gone by. I sang the giants in a graver theme, and bolts victorious in Phlegra's plains. But now I need a lighter strain to sing of boys beloved of gods and girls bewitched by lawless fires who paid the price of lust. The king of heaven was once fired with love of Ganymede, and something was devised that Jove would rather be than what he was. Yet no bird would he deign to be, but one that had the power to bear his thunderbolts. At once his spurious pinions beat the breeze, and off he swept the Trojan lad, who now, mixing the nectar, waits in heaven above, though Juno frowns, and hands the cup to Jove. Hyacinth, too, Apollo would have placed in heaven, had the drear fates given time to place him there. Yet in the form vouchsafed he is immortal. Year by year, when spring drives winter flying, and the ram succeeds the watery fish, he rises from the earth, and in the greensward brings his bloom to birth. And then it goes on to talk about Hyacinth, which I will stop now, because I don't think we need to get into the Hyacinth myth. But there's something that I find interesting about all this, right? Specifically, if we go with this idea of Venus standing for things like relationships, desire, love, and all this kind of stuff. And look, I'm just going to say it. With Venus and Pluto, I think that there is some sort of element of like jealousy or envy or something like that. Right? That there is some kind of like, and this is something I think it's interesting to actually go back to Ovid, because what you get when you hear about people like when you think about aliens, you think of like a sterile scientific, like they're gonna do like the alien, the whole. I don't want to get it's obvious, like the anal probe thing or something like that, right? But they're doing it. They're not because the aliens are horny. It's because the aliens are like scientists and they want to do science projects on people or something, right? Or like there's this kind of there's something about. In the actual mythology, there's a lot of desire for Jupiter, for Ganymede, and then Jupiter picking up Ganymede, bringing him to make his like idealized cupbearer, to the point that Juno is jealous of Ganymede. There's this kind of like inherent jealousy between Jupiter between Ganymede and Juno, right? Juno being another name for Hera, right? Hera the wife, there's the archetype of the wife, and there's the archetype of the boy toy, or this guy. So, and there's this kind of thing where that is something in ancient Greek. They had a certain kind of standard of social norms, and it's just interesting to see how at a certain point in time we saw. Maybe, I don't know, there was a certain point in time where homosexuality was judged to be an illness. Homosexuality was judged to be pathology, right? That there were people who were locked up in, psych wards, asylums, and stuff like that. You could be locked up in a psych ward or an asylum for being a gay man or even like a promiscuous woman, right? and if you were sexually, if you were more sexually active or something like that, or if you had a different kind of sexuality, that was seen as a reason why you were dirty and you were bad and you needed to be, separated from everybody else, and you needed to. If you look at the myth, it's not because it's like Jupiter is actually the desire of the god. The gods. This is kind of funny. Is that it's like this kind of thing that the Greek mythology, or at least in the eyes of Ovid, is pretty gay, right? It's pretty. It's not as sanitized as like these immaculate white pillars, and like we've purified we've purified ourselves to make ourselves acceptable to the gods. Most of these Greek myths had a lot to do with these human passions of desire or grief or mourning or loss or jealousy, and the fact that these intense emotions themselves can be like archetypal patterns that are not personal because they seize so many of people in predictable pattern ways, that kind of becomes the basis of these myths, right? And there's some basic like element of this that I feel it's just interesting, anyways, to go back to the source material, to go back to ancient Greece and experience it in this kind of like, I mean, it is translated into English, right? If I really wanted to get into it, I'd have to learn how to read Greek, I guess, right? But I thought I'd share that anyways. There is something, I think there's it's an intense transit, because I think there's a time when you gotta be careful not to like inflame the passions, or not to be triggered by envy or jealousy or resentment, or trying to, the desire to get something back from the past, like the myth of Orpheus warns us about, not to look back, right? That there's a lot of wisdom in the staying present with the reality of your life, and not being caught in this sort of like retrospective, like trying to bring back the gold, because that's another maybe an archetype that comes up from reading these stories, right? But there's also this kind of like, I feel like there's this kind of thing where it's like the homosexuality of the Greeks is kind of like, even in our current time, there's something about it that seems transgressive, right? That we're, even with all the corporate mandated wokeness, right? Like we had this thing recently in Canada. It's kind of funny that there's this town in Canada called Emo that was it was kind of funny that the name was Emo, first of all, because it kind of opens a joke for like emo kids or something. But it's apparently a rural town that's been fined for the municipality of the town being against putting on a pride parade. And so like we've got this whole thing about like a kind of like we're in a kind of big cultural reaction against pluralistic values, embracing diversity, and that has become integrated into the center, right? The center of the political center, the political authority. So it's seen as kind of like, rather than being this thing where we're so far away from the thing about gay people being, there's something wrong with them and we need to put them in a sanitarium to fix them or something like that. Now it's sort of like the gay people are integrated, but if you don't agree with that, we're going to sue you. We're going to fine you and all this kind of stuff. But then that kind of, I don't know, I don't want to get into the whole thing about the, there's also obviously an issue around, I don't need to get into it, like the criminality of, I don't know. Some people don't even use these words on their YouTube channel because it makes for a censorship. But you know where I'm going there, right? And there's this kind of like the standards of we're doing this thing where we're things are changing, right? So we're going through social changes, and there's a kind of like authority that's setting a new kind of mandate for what's acceptable, what is not acceptable, what is seen as pathological, what is seen as not pathological, and there's a kind of thing about what people don't understand about, like, I mean, I'm totally in favor of having gay pride parades and stuff like that. And what you have to understand is that there's specifically like why it even matters, or why the whole, because the people who in that town of Emo made this argument that like the classic straight pride thing, that if there's not a parade for straight people, then that the gay people don't deserve one either, right? The gay people deserve a parade specifically because their whole sexuality was seen as something that was a kind of a pathological, shameful, dirty, embarrassing thing that was rejected or discriminated against, all that kind of stuff. But it's just interesting to read go back to the Greeks, because you realize that there's so much, we make this kind of idea up that this is like there's a some kind of divine truth of what gender and sexuality is supposed to be like. But when you actually get into the myths themselves, or the kind of thing about, like, there's people, I noticed a lot of Jungians talking about how it's kind of like, to me it's redundant to say that Carl Jung wasn't woke, because I think wokeness is something that specifically came out of the civil rights movement, which was bringing equality to people of different races, people of different color, empowerment for women, all that kind of stuff. Like and the precursor maybe was like the women's suffragette movement, getting the women the right to vote, all this kind of stuff. In terms of all these transformations in society and social reforms and stuff like that, I find it really odd how there's this kind of like movement around like anti-feminism, right? And like the thing is, I don't make a lot of noise about this because I don't think it's my job as a straight white guy to like be all loud and vocal about being like a male feminist, right? But the thing about the anti-feminists is that there's so many gains and victories that the women's made through the feminist movement, like gaining the right to vote, or like, there really is basic stuff, like in Saudi Arabia, or like really fundamentalist Muslim countries, women aren't allowed to drive cars, right? Like, if you're a woman, are you allowed, is feminism, people have this association of feminism as something that is, I don't even know what if feminism means having the right to drive a car, having the right to own your own business, having the right to divorce your husband if you want to, and so on, the list, or the right to birth control and abortion, the right to all these things. There's so many of these things that, like, anyone who would call themselves an anti-feminist in no way wants to go back to a world where they can't vote, or where they can't start a business, or where they can't go to college and get an education, or, it's like you've got all these victories that have been made by the feminists to the point where they just go unquestioned. And now anti-feminism means like, well, we've done enough. We don't want any more in that direction. There's been enough progress for us. Okay, now we have to go back and encourage our men to be strong male providers for us, or something. It's like that's what anti-feminism means. It's like, I don't want to, like now that we've made all these victories, let's just kind of backtrack a bit, and I can be a stay-at-home mom and let my man make the money, and apparently that's what I don't know. I'm just going off on a riff here, right? But there's all these. I don't know. I'm kind of just. maybe I should have thought this through. I'm just kind of freestyling on it, right? But I do think that Aquarius has this principle of wanting to improve things, of wanting to make things better. It's kind of funny because it's like the way that this gets told in terms of like the archetype of the Aquarius is that the cupbearer is a servant to the king, right? There's another version of this where the cupbearer is like a eunuch, right? Somebody who's castrated, right? And that you've got the king has the royal line, and the king, in order not to be, there's another thing that goes with Pluto, right? In order to be paranoid that the people around you aren't just going to stab you in the back like it's Game of Thrones or something like that. You surround yourselves with people who are castrated, because if they were to try to take over and become king, they would not be able to continue their line due to their castration, right? So there's some Aquarius thing in that, like, instead your self-interest is to, like, propagate your lineage, to take your family line and put that into a position of power, right? Whereas the Aquarius archetype is like, you make that sacrifice where your family line can no longer you are not continuing your family line biologically anymore, and you are agreeing to take that sacrifice to be in service to the king, and to be basically subservient to the king, to be a servant, right? And this could also be seen in certain, like, the pledges of service before self, right? In the fact that, like, the opposition between Leo and Aquarius, Leo the sign of the sun, Leo the sign of kind of like independence or like of sovereignty or whatever you would say, whereas Aquarius, in contrast to that, is taking the sacrifice to be a supportive character, a supportive figure in service, right? But there's some kind of funny thing where if you actually go back to the myth of Ganymede, it has more to do with Zeus being horny for a boy toy to ogle at that makes his wife jealous, right? And there's sort of like when you get to that, like, there's that other side of it, which is just like does it mean that Aquarius is the gayest sign of the zodiac? Like, there's this kind of like and there's also kind of thing about like the cupbearer, right? And the cup being the cup is a feminine thing, right? Like being a cupbearer being like, is that like a kind of a queer code for being like a bottom? Like, or you've got like Leo as the top, Aquarius as the bottom, as a kind of like zodiacal homo-eroticism, right? And that this is something that, like, there's this thing that happened in with Christianity, but there's this kind of attitude where there's a certain kind of puritanical attitude where people didn't want to throw out all the mythology, but there's something there's this way that what is Christian gets coded as this very kind of like clean and pure kind of to be without sin is to be very like sparkling, lily white, clean and innocent and stuff like that. And then in contrast, the Greek myths were seen as these old, dirty, pagan things where all the gods are just horny and fucking each other all the time. You know what I mean? And it's sort of like, it's kind of funny because then so often, it's just amazing how much of that gets left out, right? And I think there's something about like Venus, Pluto, and Mars anyways, where it could get spicy. That's all I'm saying. Like there could be there could be some challenge around the inherent friction, tension, or the what we want to clean up and what we want to repress versus what the actual truth was. Or it's not even truth, but like from the point of view of history, right? If you're going to accurately represent Greek mythology, what were the poets actually saying? What were the poets actually talking about? And how is that different from the sanitized, cleaned up version that we present our audiences as astrologers? I don't know. To be honest, I've been sitting on this one for a while. Like, I've been, I read this, I'm like, do I really want to get in? But it's kind of been on my mind. I don't know, that this is something that, you don't hear astrologers talk very much about, but I'm throwing it out there, I don't know, for everybody in New Jersey, good luck with the drones and aliens and stuff. I don't know, and, all the healthcare CEOs, good luck, don't get too paranoid out there. For all the people who are working for a better society in America, who want more equality or more fairness in your healthcare system, I think it's a noble cause, and maybe you can join the rest of civilized society, the civilized world on planet Earth. America's one of the only countries that doesn't have a public healthcare system, right? And there's obviously a lot of people who are angry about that, right? And you know, you can understand. I mean, it's for something. Like I said, we take it for granted here in Canada, and it's been, you know, it's been an enormous support in my life. I'm grateful for the public healthcare system here, and there's something. I think Aquarius could do with that kind of institutional reform, right? The need to transform the institutions which support us. But then there's also could be certain funny things which are hidden under the rug, right? That may come out as a plutonic eruption from the underworld. But then at the same time, there may be stuff that's way in the past that it's just better to don't look back. Just keep moving forward. Don't try to bring back the old ghosts from that are better left behind in our history. But then there's still what are we in the present moment? What are we dealing with, right? And the inherent kind of like futurism that's often, I mean, the futurism usually has to do with the age of Aquarius. We're not going to get into that now. Anyways, I don't know, some ideas. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting the channel. Dan's Astrology is here to stay.